Some thoughts on opportunism. Lately, I have been struck by a phenomenon where progressives have taken things said by the center of the Democratic Party at face value. So, for example, the agenda set out by Biden in the first 100 days was kind of anemic. It was masks, fixing the vaccine relay, opening up schools. One of which, by the way, is not a federal prerogative under the Constitution, and seemed to rely on the fact that Democratic governors would turn on the presidential order because it would be more popular with a certain segment of parents, without considering the fact that many of the lockdown procedures that these governors have pushed in their states seem to be undermined by switching course and adopting narratives pushed by the Trump administration barely 2 months ago. Now, I could go into COVID on schools. I've actually been frustrated by both sides of the mainstream political discourse on it this entire time. The science on it is not as clear as either side has presented it, but that's not what this is about. And I'm not talking to you about COVID today. You need to go to specialists for that. Now, today I'm talking to you about opportunism. Now, in Blue Check World on Twitter, there's a certain category of Democratic operative who has been talking about how the Syria bombing happening without tweet fanfare and the indiscretions of a braggadocious president is somehow a vindication of Biden's competence and military acumen. Now, Biden's history on military affairs is actually fairly hawkish. People forgot that he was to the right of Obama on such things, and Obama was also far more military accommodationist than his supporters had hoped in 2008, even though he had said as much. Yes, he was against the war in Iraq, but he was never against the war in Afghanistan. And even I was a little bit surprised when you had a slate of fairly progressive candidates set out by the Biden administration. After all, when you look at the Senate, with the exception of a few new progressives that the DSA and other leftists have helped get elected, you're very much looking at a gerontocracy that increasingly looks like the California and New York version of the Soviet Politburo in the 1980s. And without the speaking ability of our acumen of said Politburo. But I've also been saying this entire time that the squad, the mainstream of the DSA, almost all serve to more or less legitimize the center of the Democratic Party. After all, they told me that Bernie Sanders, head of the budget committee, could get past parliamentary and conservative Democrat opposition to parts of the COVID relief bill. As of yesterday, the parliamentarian said that they could not do that and the rules did not allow that. Now, interesting enough, that's never come up under a Republican Senate, but maybe it's because the Republican Senate understands the rules better. After all, the Democrats are not used to such shenanigans, and also don't really want to do it. And if you think that is unfair, look at their track record. Furthermore, Biden's liberalization of immigration policy, as we saw here, even as some people around me work with pro-immigration stuff with Sanctuary here, and I don't want to out them, but they were super excited, and people were seeming to get stays. When a Texas court put the stays down, everything fell to a halt and went back to normal. the youth detention centers are still open because of complications created by Trump policy, but there's very there's very little evidence that these will be closed anytime real soon, and it's very reminiscent of Obama's attempt to close the Gitmo, getting opposed and immediately dropping it, never to touch it again. Like that's even something anemic like a $15 minimum wage, which the fight for 15 was more meaningful 10 years ago when it was started, as inflation has been happening at 2 to 3% a year for the last decade, just like everywhere else. And even people as prestigious as Doug Henwood and Nora Belaski telling me that this was going to be a good deal. Now, structurally speaking, Tim Manchin is the most important person in the Senate, and with even former Green Party members like Kristen Sinema opposing the minimum wage, it seems like that's a strange way to handle something that is clearly more easily handled by direct stimulus. After all, if unemployment is already fairly high due to COVID, then the $15 minimum wage will take a long time to trickle out. Furthermore, the market is meeting that anyway. As I've said many times, the minimum wage is generally set to just below what the market will already meet. Hence, the push for 15 is at a time where very few people get paid the minimum wage in a lot of major cities. So most of the progressive elements of the Biden agenda and things that were in his control are seemingly in his control aren't happening. And we have bombings in Syria, which is not to say that those bombings are occurring out of nowhere. After all, there's a militant campaign against the U.S. military force, but of course that is also prompted by the fact that we've been engaged in the Middle East for, I don't know, 2 decades now, and almost 3 decades now. Thus, we see the return to 2008 patterns. We also see that the progressives, however much they do and however much they might try to pass bills to kick all the Congress people who voted against solemnizing the election out of Congress, that they really can't put their agenda on the table at anything other than to attack their political opponents. Furthermore, the last poll I saw that many Democrats think the most pressing problem in America is Trump supporters. Come now. And instead of pivoting their own way, many people, of course, pick another side in this culture war and pretend that's not what they're doing. Complaints about the PMC or whatever come from something real, as I've said many times before, even though I don't like that framework. But let's be honest for a second. It's fought in the way you fight a culture war. Many people fighting it are in the same class as the people they're fighting. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening in Brooklyn. So, I want you to be honest with yourself. Can you say that you've done anything to change the political status quo? Has this movement of the Overton window that has normalized the word socialism really changed anything for you, or has it hollowed out the concept? This is not to say that a clearly delimited concept is necessarily good, but seriously. We can debate MMT, we can debate value theory, we can do all these things, and all these things are important if you have some kind of sense of socialist policy. But if you have no means to power and you have no class for itself, and by the way, I can go into what that means for you, but that means a class acting in its own interest in which the socialist movement is aligned, you got nothing. And functionally, is a lot of the social movement actually helping the working class? I mean, look at its policy suggestions. Medicare for all, of course, is important and would be helpful. The relief of student debt, while it would actually disproportionately go to upper middle class professionals who have more college debt because they have higher paid professional degrees, because of the expansion of credentialing, yes, it would actually still really help a great deal of working class poor people. as well. Sometimes you have to get over it. But then you talk about free college. Well, in the studies, if you look at countries with free college, like Germany, the class disparities still remain very to trend similar to the United States. The free colleges with elite colleges are only useful if they aren't super exclusive. And colleges need to maintain their exclusivity for competitive reasons with other colleges, or the university system in that country falls apart. So the privileges of education that can be bestowed by money still carry through even if college is free. Come on, people. Think through things. Have you done anything other than save the center in the last 6 years? Has that harm reduction you've been doing actually stopped that much harm? You may call me a post leftist or whatever. I mean, I always uh, would feel better if people didn't use such terms. I mean, if you're going to move to populism, call yourself a populist. If you're going to move to nationalism, call yourself a nationalist. If you're going to move to rightism, call yourself a rightist. But also, if you're going to use radical rhetoric but essentially support the the center, don't lie to yourself. The same applies to you too. And in this way, there's many people in the DSA who hate um, the the quote democratic center, and yet they're supporting it. And often, even when they're opposing people like MMTers, as much or more than the MMTers are. But QAnon, but yeah, there's conspiracy theories everywhere. There's structural explanations for the world. There's reifications. There's all kinds of lies. A lot of people just pick the lies their side wants to forgive. I challenge you not to forgive any of it. If you want to change this, the first thing you have to do is quit lying to yourself. And if you're not already lying to yourself, good on you. But the amount of people who thought the world was going to magically change in November indicates to me that maybe isn't just COVID driving people stir crazy.